As many of you know, I've talked a lot over the past year and a half or so since I started this podcast. I've mentioned a lot. I've talked a lot about the Phoenix Lights event in 1997, where basically well over 1,000 people in Arizona in the Phoenix area saw an incredibly gigantic craft, floating around, including the governor there at the time. He saw it too, and many people saw it. They said it was gigantic. It was incredible. It was basically a gigantic triangle just hovering around that region. And, a lot of people saw it. And, the government tried to say it was different things. They tried to give different excuses. Oh, it was flares, or it was jets in formation, all kinds of different excuses. But none of those, they were just lying like they usually do when it comes to these big events. And that case was no different. And then there was another case that that happened in 2008, in the winter of 2008 in Stephenville, Texas, which I've broached on a few times. And I want to go through that really quick because, again, this was a second case. It wasn't as apparently not as many people saw this, but there were quite a few people in the Stephenville, Texas area that did see a gigantic object. And there was an article here that I dug up from MUFON. And I'll leave the link for this. It says, MUFON releases report on UFO sighting in Stephenville, Texas. And actually this happened and started on January 8th, 2008. And there were, it lasted for about 3 days. A lot of people were seeing this, objects, big object, other objects. It was basically, it seemed like the extraterrestrials were putting on a show. But anyway, it says on January 8th, 2008 in Stephenville, Texas, one of the larger UFO sightings in the United States occurred. A few days ago, the UFO investigative organization Mutual UFO Network released a 77-page report on the sighting. MUFON is a UFO investigative organization in the United States. The MUFON report, titled Special Research Report Stephenville, Texas, was written by Glenn Scholes and Rupert Powell. Scholes has radar experience from working at the White Sands Missile Range. Powell has a chemistry degree and has extensive experience with semiconductors from working for advanced micro devices. The report is an analysis of radar records from the Federal Aviation Administration and the National Weather Service obtained through several Freedom of Information Act requests and comparing them to witness accounts. Schultz Powell concluded that the radar data confirms the witness observations of an object, as well as the Air Force's statement that said 10 aircraft were operating in the area. They say that it is too difficult to say what the witnesses saw, but that there was something there. Twice, they say, radar picked up an object traveling at nearly 2,000 miles per hour, and at other times it showed a slow-moving object. Much media attention has been focused on the report's observation that the radar records show one of two objects moving directly toward the Prairie Chapel Ranch in Crawford. This is the home of the United States President George W. Bush and has been nicknamed the Western White House. They did not draw any conclusion as to why such movement was observed. The authors also concluded that military air activity was heavy at the time and that the radar records show no overt action toward the unknown object. They expressed concern about the possibility that this could have been a terrorist aircraft with no transponder. Schultz Powell stated that they felt that they had been stonewalled in some of their Freedom of Information Act requests by some government agencies. They encouraged the government to more readily provide more information about the incident. The Stephenville incident on January 8th saw dozens of witnesses reporting a large object in the evening sky that hovered above the community before it took off at a high speed. Steve Allen, a pilot, observed the object from the ground and described it as being a half mile with flashing strobe lights. He also said that it was pursued by two fighter jets when it disappeared at a speed he estimated to be 3,000 miles per hour. Here's a direct quote from Allen. He says, "I don't know if it was a biblical experience or somebody from a different universe or whatever, but it was definitely not from around these parts." Now, let me just stop there for a second. So, again, this is another case where a giant object, which is obviously not human-made, obviously it's extraterrestrial, a giant half a mile wide, flying up in the sky with a strobe light, and then jets appear, fighter jets appear, right? The thing takes off. We've heard these stories so many times. It happens so many times. But this is the other witnesses that at the time that I thought was this was a really interesting witness here. No, not this one, but the next one. Excuse me. I'm sorry about that. Another witness was local law enforcement officer Leroy Gateman, who reported it as a red glowing object suspended 3,000 feet in the air. It was so fast I couldn't track it with my binoculars, said Gateman. Now, this guy here, the next one, this is the guy I'm talking about, Rick Sorrells. This guy here saw this object basically in broad daylight while he was hunting, and the thing was gigantic. And anyway, Sorrells says he saw the object while deer hunting in the woods. You could look at the trees and it was right there, he told ABC News. He estimated it to be the length of 3 or 4 football fields, though he could not be entirely sure due to his vantage point. Sorrells has later claimed that military helicopters have since overflown his property at low altitude and that he has been getting strange phone calls. He also claims that an unknown man came to his door, even once told him that, son, we have the same caliber weapons you have, but we have more of them. After Sorrells grabbed his rifle and the guy said, you need to shut your mouth about what you saw. So basically, this guy was getting threatened. We've heard these kind of stories before. This guy was getting threatened. The guys told him, you need to shut your mouth about what you saw. And I remember actually seeing an interview with this guy at the time, with Sorrells. And basically, this object that he saw was gigantic. Incredibly large. Beyond anything that we could possibly have. And there was no sound coming from it. That would be impossible for us to have something like this. We are just not that technologically advanced to have something like that. And again, the threats come. But anyway, continuing it here, it says, Sorrells later told the Empire Tribune newspaper, I'm trying to decide whether or not to open the door. We're just standing there face to face looking at each other. I'm thinking he's dressed for the elements and the dogs are raising such a ruckus. He must know he's in danger of being caught. That's when I realized he wanted to see me. The man then turned away and walked into the woods. So some strange guy's coming up to his door, telling him to keep his mouth shut, and then goes walking away. Now, I guess there's always a possibility this could have been one of the extraterrestrials. We've heard, sometimes I believe that this sounds like a Men in Black kind of story, right? But we do know government officials have threatened people before, Roswell. There's so many different people in Roswell that claim this kind of activity. But sometimes these Men in Black incidents, which could be government officials, or sometimes maybe they could be extraterrestrials in disguise, or maybe some sort of hybrid extraterrestrial that gets sent out to, try to threaten people and keep their mouth shut. But then again, if that were the case, if it were aliens, why were they showing up in a giant spacecraft in the first place? So that doesn't make any sense to me at all. So I would imagine that somebody from the government decided to go to this Sorrells guy and basically tell him to keep his mouth shut. Because he was very convincing. The guy was why he had no reason to lie. He's out deer hunting. He looks up through the trees and there was this object that it was completely covering the entire sky. He could barely see where the edges were. Continuing with this little article here. Now this article was put together by MUFON, I guess, shortly after this incident happened. The United States Air Force initially said witnesses must have seen reflections coming from commercial airliners. However, they later clarified that 10 F-16 Fighting Falcons had been on a nighttime training mission in the area on January 8th. In the again, it's airplanes. Now, come on. People know it. People aren't stupid. These things happen all the time. People would report them this would happen regularly. It's just not going to happen. People know the difference between jets, right, in formation, and a giant singular object. In the interest of public awareness, Air Force Reserve Command Public Affairs realized an error was made regarding the reported training activity of military aircraft, said the statement. So, again, the statement comes first because they didn't have a statement initially, so they had to make something up and pretend that we made a mistake. Yeah, there was 10 F-16 Fighting Falcons flying around that night. So nothing to worry about. Those people, they're stupid. They didn't know what they saw. Basically, that's what it is. According to Air Force spokesperson Carrie Lewis, the aircraft were from the 457th Fighter Squadron, and the error in the initial report was due to an internal communications problem between offices at the base. Okay, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some Fighting Falcons that were sent out, to look at this object or objects. right? I wouldn't be surprised at all if they were sent out. But to try to chase it away or see what it is or whatever, right? But this was all nonsense. Again, they always tell us stuff like this, because they have to maintain this cover up, for whatever. Again, I think the cover up comes down to, basically the reason is because they're reverse engineering these things behind the scenes. I think originally it was because there was concerns about panic, but over time it turned into, hey, if we reverse engineer this stuff, we could take over the world. We can control everybody, even people within our own country. Because really, that's really what could be. Basically, a small group controlling this, right? Controlling this information, even our own. They would have control over everything, right? Basically, if you had this kind of technology, it could be used for nefarious purposes, couldn't it? I think it could. But there was another story that happened. This kind of thing where these major events, they happen every now and then, right? And in fact, there was one that happened in 1950 in Farmington, New Mexico, and this is a lot of people don't know about this. But here's an article I dug up from 2021 that was written that appeared on Mystery Wire, and it was written by George Knapp, of course, the famous UFO investigator who broke the Bob Lazar story back in 1989, and also Duncan Phoenix. And I'll read some of this article, and I'll also leave the link for you. It says, long before the current wave of headlines about UFO incidents, American newspapers considered the mystery to be a serious subject. One of the most spectacular cases of all time occurred over a 3-day period in 1950. Thousands of witnesses saw hundreds of unknown objects in the sky. And then they have a picture of a newspaper article here from 3/18/1950, the Los Angeles Times. So this was being talked about, by a lot of people, by not a lot of newspapers. So it was in the public eye. For most, just hearing someone say Roswell, New Mexico, conjures up the crash of something outside of town in July 1947. The Roswell incident is now widely considered the granddaddy of all UFO cases. But 3 years later, in another part of the state, there was a much bigger event, an armada of unknown aircraft put on a spectacular display that lasted nearly 3 days. It happened in the rural town of Farmington, New Mexico. According to first-hand witness reports, newspaper headlines and stories, and government documents, the town was buzzed by various UFOs over 3 days. The reports describe people seeing classic flying saucers, some of which flew in distinct formations, while others performed impossible maneuvers. Then David Marler, who was being interviewed for this article, and he was an investigator who looked into this case extensively. He says, "I love this headline, Spaceships Cause Sensation." That's what Marler said. These were front page news stories at that time. And when we talk about the sightings, to your point, we have to underscore the fact that this was 2.5 to 3 days of broad daylight sightings of anywhere from single to dozens to quite literally hundreds of reports. David Marler is one of the most meticulous UFO researchers anywhere. During the interview with Mystery Wire, Marler explained that he called a quick rundown of what he called a quick rundown of the events from March 1950. In Tucumcari, New Mexico, which is on the opposite end of the state on the far east end, we have a flyover of a solitary object that was documented in the Tucumcari Daily Times. It was described as a saucer, and they could tell it was a saucer because of the way it tipped and moved. They could appreciate it from different vantage points, which is interesting because that echoes other reports that we heard from Farmington. That was at 9:15 on Friday, March 17th. And then we have 10:15 a.m. in Farmington. 5 to 9 saucers observed directly over Main Street, departed to the northeast, and were reported 45 minutes later to the west of town by other witnesses. 10:30, hundreds. That's a quote from the newspaper of objects seen west of town from the Farmington Daily Times. 10:30, a red object was observed in 2 revolving discs seen having a tussle in the sky. Then we have at 10:30 another portion of the sky, revolving discs swooping and swerving and turning like a top, were reported by witnesses. And then at 10:35, 3 objects stage a day dogfight in the sky. Again, a direct quote from the newspaper, where these things seem to be interacting with one another. At 11 o'clock, we had a sighting of a solitary saucer-shaped object that circled town, came from the southwest and departed to the northeast with a sudden burst of speed. 11 o'clock, 2 metallic UFO were seen, smaller UFO moving very fast south to north, and a larger one was seen stationary. So these weren't objects blowing in the wind. One was stationary while the other one was moving. 11:15 to 11:30, swarm of hundreds of objects observed. Red object is seen again and reported by witnesses. These departed to the northeast with a sudden burst of speed. 2 o'clock, now we're into the afternoon. A silvery object shaped like a rectangle with rounded ends was seen moving in a westerly direction. At 3 o'clock, a fleet of hundreds, again, direct quote from the newspaper, flying formation from the northeast headed to the southwest. Now, as you can see, I'm just going to stop there for a second. I mean, this is incredible. And, there was like thousands of people, at least over 1,000 people apparently that saw this in this area. I mean, it went on for 3 days. They're putting on a daylight show. I mean, it was objects all over the place, doing all kinds of crazy things and crazy maneuvers that traditional aircraft is, especially back then. I mean, even today it would be very different. We wouldn't be able to do it. Continuing with this statement for Marler, he says, at that same time, I was able to find in my research, based on Albuquerque newspapers, that there was a sighting also corroborated in Project Grudge files. 3 tech sergeants and an Air Force captain standing on the tarmac of Kirtland Air Force Base at 3 o'clock saw 3 objects moving off to the northeast over the Sandia Mountains. It was significant enough that they officially reported it to Project Grudge. And then later in the afternoon, there's no time actually listed in the newspaper, over Las Vegas, New Mexico, a flyover of multiple unidentified aerial objects was seen. And then in Tucumcari, again, on the east end of the state, we have a flyover of multiple objects with a red leader being observed as well. And that's one of the consistent themes, is this red object that was different from the others. The other ones were described as silver or gray moving into formation, not a V formation, I might add. All the witnesses were extremely adamant, because many were former World War II military veterans, who said that they were moving in a formation, but not an echelon formation like we would do with a jet aircraft. Marler calls this all a significant series of sightings. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of witnesses, not just in Farmington, not just an Aztec, not just in New Mexico, but in San Antonio, Dallas, and even down into Mexico City. Just in the last month, Marler uncovered a new witness account from the UFO sightings in Farmington. He said he was reviewing the October 1950 nightcap, which was the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. They used to investigate these incidents. It was like a private civilian group from the 50s into the 70s, I believe. He said he was reviewing an October 1950 nightcap UFO file and stumbled across a misfiled UFO report related to Farmington. This report, for the first time, included a witness sketch from the Farmington event. So it had a sketch showing where the object, how it was moving and what the object looked like. I mean, basically, it was saucer shaped, just a drawing of a saucer. But anyway, I'm going to stop there. The rest, there's a whole interview here that you could watch online on YouTube, and that will be included in the link for this Mystery Wire article. But I guess the point of all of this is you see that every now and then it seems like something like this happens. Now, this Farmington event happened over the course of 3 days, where people were seeing all kinds of flying saucers and other strange objects just flying around, doing crazy stunts basically in the sky. And everyone, a lot of people saw this. And then if you look at 1997, the Phoenix Lights, you had that incident. And of course, the 2008, you had the Stephenville, Texas incident. And again, 2008's probably the most recent, mass sighting, the mass giant event, with Stephenville. But again, back in 2008, the technology of the cell phone, right, wasn't as good as it is now, right? Not as many people had them back in 2008. In fact, I didn't get my first cell phone until 2007 when I moved to Hawaii. And if you did have one, that first cell phone I had was one of those flip phones. And yes, you know, they didn't really do a good job at making good videos. Not like this thing. This cell phone I have now could do up to 8K, and a lot of other people have these. Even if it does 4, who cares? They basically all do high definition recording now. So the next time one of these things happens, right? The next time there's another incident like this, where there's the Farmington 1950 incident, the 1997 Phoenix Lights incident, or the 2008 Stephenville, Texas incident, and there's some other incidents too, right, where there was lots of people who see objects, right? Next time one of these things happens, right, and there's like over 1,000 witnesses, and people filming it from hundreds of different vantage points potentially, right? What's the government gonna do then? What are they gonna do? Are you going to say, oh, yeah, it was balloons and fighter jets and, natural phenomena, meteors? You know, but what are you going to do when that's not when you could just tell by looking at it that that's not what it is? See, that it's so stupid to continue playing this game, because, again, one of these events is going to happen again. It's just bound to. It just every now and then these beings obviously want to put on a show for whatever reason, and they want to put it on in front of a large group of people. Sometimes these shows will last for days. Next time it happens, you're going to have not only regular people filming, and if it lasts for 3 days like this Farmington incident, right? If it lasts that long, you're going to have news cameras from all over the world. You know, they'll get there and they'll start filming it live. There'll be live feeds on TV. How are you going to stop it? You're not going to be able to stop it. You won't be able to cover that up. So again, it doesn't make any sense to continue to cover up because of incidents like this. I mean, there's basically an armada of UFOs showed up in 1950 in Farmington. Then you have the Phoenix Lights. You have Stephenville, Texas again. Now, the technology that people had. I mean, yeah, apparently there was a picture that was taken. There were some images, video and stuff that was taken of the Phoenix Lights, right? But again, the technology we had back then wasn't that good, and there was some imagery, there was some video from what I recall of the Stephenville, Texas stuff. But again, it wasn't that good. But the next time, everything's different now because of these things, cell phones. Everything's different now. Next time everyone's going to be filming this stuff, and there's going to be nothing. All the king's horses and all the king's men aren't going to put this Humpty Dumpty back together again, right? That's going to be the end game, right? So again, why are we playing this game? You're going to wait till something like that happens, and then pretend you never knew they were here? Because let me tell you something, they are here. They are here. It's time to get this. It's time to end this nonsense, and before something like that happens. Anyway. Until next time.